Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to DiGRA India 2022. This is our second conference, and we are a very young organization, DiGRA India, and we've been battling many bosses, monsters, and clearing many levels to get video games research up into like the Indian research psyche. Taking on all of the more serious and more traditional intellectual traditions and trying to establish ourselves in proper academic research, and of course as part of digital humanities, whatever that might mean. So we have now put 2 years behind us. We started in November 2020, and we are November 2022 today. 27th, this is about the time when we started. Poonam and I, we had a phone call, and Poonam is here and you'll meet her shortly. So we had a phone call and we decided to just go ahead with it, and we gathered this merry gang of video gamers and outlaws, and we've gone ahead with this ever since. We have so far managed to host 52 talks, which I think is quite an achievement for an organization which goes with no funding. I mean, of course, if you donate to us, you're always welcome. But we have no funding. We have no official university affiliation so far. We are working on this, but and we are mostly, excepting for myself, we are mostly students. I'm an assistant professor, and everybody else is either a PhD, a grad student, or a master's student. And this is love of labor of love, and we have now a really large group in our DiGRA India family, in that we have besides the core committee, we have over 120 members in our WhatsApp group and elsewhere. And thanks to your support, we've been able to go on. We have also organized another conference before this last year, where we had Meg Jayant give this fantastic keynote speech, which is quoted the world over nowadays. And of course, our own Sarah Rizvi and Poonam Chaudhary also gave such fantastic keynotes. This is our second conference, and here we want to address something that is really important for Indians, I think. I mean, new Indian, cutting edge Indian research, science fiction, SF, which is now beginning to make a big mark really in India, and with people like Bodhi Chattopadhyay, with Sami himself, who's going to speak to us very soon. We're honored to have him here, and others. We have actually seen massive inroads into science fiction, and of course, with video games research, video game design, and we want to see where we connect and how this really works out. So once again, bringing you more interesting research, and hopefully 2 days of very interesting papers. Welcome to DiGRA India, and well, enjoy the next 2 days. Over to Sarah.
Thank you, Shovik. Hello and welcome to everyone for our very first keynote session on Yoga Firing Nuclear Gandhis, Video Games and Indian Science Fiction by Dr. Sami Ahmed Khan, who's been so kind to be here with us today. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Sami, even though he needs no introduction anywhere in the world. Sami Ahmed Khan is a writer, academic, and documentary producer. His future war thriller Red Jihad won 2 awards, NBT India's National Debut Youth Fiction Award, co-winner, and Muse India Young Writer Award, runners-up. His second novel, Aliens in Delhi, garnered rave reviews and was shortlisted for the Sahitya Akademi Yuva Puraskar. His creative and critical writings have appeared in leading academic journals, Science Fiction Studies, the Journal of Pop Culture, Foundation, Fafnir, University Presses, and trade imprints. His overview of Indian SF has been translated into Czech, and his short story has been translated into Marathi. His fiction has been the subject of formal academic research and a part of university syllabi in India and the US. He is the recipient of a Mary Sklodowska-Curie Actions Fellowship, University of Oslo, Norway, a Fulbright FLTA grant, University of Iowa, USA, and a UGC MA and F Senior Research Fellowship, JNU, India. He holds a PhD in science fiction from JNU and has taught at the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, Jindal Global University, and GTS Indraprastha University. His latest book is the critically acclaimed Star Warriors of the Modern Raj, Materiality, Mythology, and Technology of Indian Science Fiction, which was longlisted for the BSFA Award. We are so delighted to have you here. Over to you, Sami.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure being here. And when Shovik first reached out to me, I said, but I don't really know much about video games. And he said, you know what? Just come and talk to us about the stuff that do know. So what I will do in this session is that rather than a keynote, I hope that this is more of a conversation. So if I say something and you want to respond, just scream and shout and say, hey, can we talk about this? So please feel free to interrupt me. This is not supposed to be, me professing some fundamental truth here. On the contrary, this is just a bunch of like-minded people getting together to do something that they love doing, and that is talking about different things. So yoga firing nuclear Gandhis. And so whenever I hear the word video games in the context of India, this is something that immediately springs to my memory because that is something I find familiar. And this is my launching pad into this entire discussion. I'm going to move on to the next slide, and I'm going to begin with a disclaimer. Unfortunately, I'm not a gamer. I'm not a game designer, a game studies scholar, a member of the game industry. Instead, I'm merely someone who absolutely enjoys the liberation promised by the total immersion in video games. And I'm especially interested in the science fiction aspects of video game narratives. And that is something which I will be talking about. Background. So we talk a lot about, the BRIC countries, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China. That is something which we talk about a lot, especially in our geopolitical and geoeconomical formulations as of now. But for me, growing up in the 1990s, BRIC was actually Blanca, Zangief, Thalsim, and Chun-Li. That was my first introduction to Brazil, Russia, India, and China in an arcade somewhere in New Delhi. And I grew up on 16-bit console games such as Road Fighter. My first brush with video games was actually arcade games, Street Fighter, Dinosaurs and Cadillacs, Contra, Mario, Tekken, In early 2000s, I shifted to FPS games, like Return to Castle Wolfenstein, IGI, Delta Force, Battlefield 1942, Red Faction, Clive Barker's Undying. But then the machine stopped. And it stopped for a reason. Maybe we can discuss that later. But right now, this is not about why my machine stopped, but about why the Indian video game machine must go on. And that is what we'll talk about. Okay, so the structure of this presentation is divided into 4 parts. First, I'll talk a little bit about video games in and India. 2, science fiction as a genre mode, understanding science fiction by a model, and then comprehending and synthesizing video game narratives. That is the kind of structure that we are going to adopt for this session. And as I said, please feel free to interrupt me. Please feel free to tell me that, well, this is not how it works. Please feel free to tell me there's a better way of doing things. I'm all ears. First, video games in and India. Now, video games in India are almost everywhere. I mean, not only in our phones, PCs, laptops, tablets, but also in our shared imaginations, and they cast long shadows across the popular media. To cite 2 examples in terms of a sort of a transmedial intervention, Mario, a game developer in the Telugu language film Zombie Reddy, battles a zombie uprising. So perhaps only a game developer can have the imagination or the gumption to battle a zombie uprising in India. And this particular zombie uprising happens in Kurnool, Andhra Pradesh, if I'm not mistaken. Similarly, Jeevan fights Ravan in, well, the Hindi language film Ravan. This is something which we all know about, and you can see there's a PS2 version of that. But then there are many Indias in many video games, right? Clearly, there cannot be one India. There have to be many Indias. There has to be sort of, this, very polyphonic idea of India. But then, is this idea of India almost similar, not so similar, very dissimilar? And what are the reasons that different kinds of Indias are projected on our video games? So to cite a few examples, India in video games from abroad, say Street Fighter, where we had Thalsim. Assassin's Creed, you have a Brazmir. In Uncharted, The Lost Legacy, that is again set in South India. India in video games from within. You have, IAF, A Cut Above, IAF, Guardian of the Skies. Both were official games released by the IAF. Flight sim games. with different missions that revolve around IAF protocols. We have 4G, we have Raji and Ancient Epic, and in perhaps all of these, India is different. And the question is, how whether the portrayal of India differs in these games? Well, of course it does. But what does that depend on? Maybe who's producing the game? What is the production? What is the location of production? What is the location of consumption of the game? What is the location of deployment of the game? For whom is the game being produced? Who's the target audience? Is it a global target audience? Is it a national target audience? Is it a local target audience? Is it like intersecting subsets? What are the market and political factors? What purpose does the game serve? Is there an ideological agenda behind the game? For example, 4G was set primarily in the backdrop of the Galwan Valley clashes. Then what are the technical requirements and limitations? Are there any other factors that change the way India is portrayed? But personally, I'm more interested in how science fiction contours games. And with that, we move on to our next section, which is about science fiction as a genre and more, because that is the kind of lens I will adopt to look at video games in India and India in video games. First, the very basics, the very basics. What is science fiction? Hugo Gernsback says it's 75% literature, 25% science. Asimov says it is the branch of literature that deals with reactions of human beings to changes in science and technology. Brooks Landon says something similar. Christopher Evans says that it is the literature of what if. But then the question is SF the only genre that speculates and creates alternate worlds? Well, to answer this rather seemingly simple question, I would engage in a thought experiment. Well, not exactly a thought experiment. We can actually play it out in the real world. I'm not sure if you guys can see me. Can you guys see me? You can, of course, see the PPT, but am I visible?
Yes, we can see you.
Yes, you are.
Yes. Okay. Then perhaps you'll also be able to see this bottle. Do you see this bottle?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, this is something I do a lot because I absolutely love using this example. I would request all the audiences to maybe just close their eyes for 2 seconds, just 2 seconds. On my mark, starting now. Mark. Open your eyes now, please. What do you see? What is this? What just happened? Did something happen? Did something change? Did something change? Well, the bottle moved from here to here, right? Did this happen, or am I just imagining this happen? You guys are making me feel like I'm in the Matrix. Did I actually do it, or did I pretend to do it? Did it happen? But
I think your green screen doesn't help.
Oh my God, I am so sorry. My sincerest apologies. I had no idea. So basically the point I was trying to make is that you have a bottle, you have an object at a particular, spatiotemporal coordinates, say, A. You close your eyes and within the blink of an eye, the object moves from those coordinates to a different set of locations, right? So it moves from coordinates, say, location A to location B. Are you with me till now?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So what do you think happens? What do you think just happened? This object moving from location A to location B within the blink of an eye. What just happened? How would you categorize it? How would you explain this? Think about it. So this is where the bottle comes into being. And this is how we move to our next term, that is speculative fiction. Now, speculative fiction or speculative imagination comprises multiple things: fantasy, mythology, science fiction. So if you were into fantasy, you would say, well, an object moving from point A to point B within the blink of an eye, well, that is because of magic, because, well, that is how it works. And you would cite the examples of Harry Potter's, apparition of Floo Potter, where you can travel from point A to point B. If you're into mythology, you would say, well, actually, this was done because of a result of a divine being. And you might give the example of Thor's Bifrost Bridge. If you're into science fiction, you will immediately jump and say, well, this is the transporter. You are transporting matter. This is instantaneous displacement of matter from point A to point B. And you are sort of, breaking things down into its constituent elements. But then how does this work in a game? right? So if you are playing a video game and you have this sort of instantaneous displacement, what do you call it? Do you call this fantasy? Do you call this mythology? Do you call this science fiction? Do you call this SFF, science fiction and fantasy? Or do you call this something else altogether? Or do you say, well, what is the need to call it anything at all? Let's just play the game. That is also perfectly fine. So an example from video games, right? So you have something similar happens in, say, Halo, where you move from point A to point B through these portals, which are driven by technology. Again, Halo, clearly science fiction. In Clive Barker's Undying, for example, these portals which drive you from or bleed you from one dimension to the other, to the netherworld, are driven by the occult, right? So different kinds of forces are driving those portals. However, the effect on the character is the same, that the character moves from point A to point B. Something similar happens in science fiction, that, you know, we said that, okay, science fiction is a genre. It's a genre because, well, you have romance, horror, action, thrill, suspense, science fiction, fantasy, mythology. But then very often genres fuse, they come together. The classic example, I mean, if you take Halo, Halo has horror, it has action, it has thrill, it has suspense, it has science fiction elements, it has some elements of fantasy. So categorizing texts, games, you know, visual phenomena using the current tools we have, that is slightly problematic, and that is something we need to be aware of when we try to find newer ways to understand them, approach them, and explicate them. And this is where I would like to talk about the in situ model. Now, when I was reading science fiction, I was struck by how we don't really have much theoretical vantage points to look at the science fiction that is being produced in India by Indians and for Indians. I mean, we had theories coming to us from the global north, and then somehow we had to rearrange our data in order to make sense for those theories. So basically, we were applying theories from a different vantage point to data from a different vantage point, and that there was a certain mismatch. As we speak now, we have a lot of wonderful work, like critical work coming out of India to understand science fiction and similar objects. Bodhisattva Chattopadhyay talks about mythology. Shuparna Banerjee talks about different models. Shovikta, talks about different ways to understand of video games. So I tried to understand what SF is and how it could be explicated in familiar settings, because now the theories that I read, some of them made sense and some of them were not really applicable. So I was trying to come up with something that works in the Indian context, or say the context of the global south. And the in situ model primarily is divided into three realms: the realms of space, time, and being. It is propagated by three theses: the transmit thesis, the Antikal thesis, and the neo-monsters thesis. The transmit thesis talks about how technology, ideology, and mythology come together and contour narratives of science fiction or scientific fiction. I am going to, of course, talk about all these three theses in detail in the following slides. This is just the first introductory slide. The Antikal thesis talks about time, about how time and temporalities are approached in speculative fiction, in science fiction. And the neo-monsters thesis talks about the others in these kind of situations. First, the transmit thesis. So the transmit thesis evidences how science fiction narratives exist across the intersecting domains of technology, of materiality, politics, ideology, and mythology. Point being that through its body, science fiction narratives, they somehow transmit emergent technologies, sedimented mythologies, and mutating ideologies. And the basic operations of science fiction texts, they operate across and beyond these three sets, which often intersect, right? So if you were to apply this to video games, which is something I haven't done till now, to be honest, it would be something like, how does the mythic contour the video game narrative in, say, Raji, in which you have Hindu gods who appear? How do you approach the ideological, the enemy soldiers in 4G? How do you handle the newly, invented or discovered things that propel narrative and gameplay in different games around you? So this thesis lends itself to a series of questions through which different texts and the relationship between texts and texts themselves can be explicated or unearthed at least, right? Then the second is the Antika thesis. So about transmit, I write in Star Warriors of the Modern Raj, which is my latest monograph. The Antikal thesis I discuss in a forthcoming chapter in the Rutledge Handbook of Co-Futurisms, and New Monsters I discuss in a paper on the Journal of Popular Culture. So the Antikal thesis as of now, right? So Antikal is that, think of it as comprising these three roots, Ant, Kal, right? Ant, Kal. We know what Ant means, we know what Kal means, right? However, when you read narratives, a lot of them play with temporalities in a way that you find some disruptions in the way time is, appropriated and the way time is deployed in the narrative. So Antakal primarily comes from the Latin ante kal, as in before time, something that happens before times. You might say, well, the Silicon Valley came up with something in, say, the 1970s or 1980s. But in the Indian mythic imagination, that same product was available to us 5,000 years ago. This is the golden past narrative, which is used by a particular religious like religious and political angle to it. So then you're saying that something exists, before its time. But then you're not just saying that, it is also against, time. It's the anti, because you're saying that, well, the mere presence of this thing before time leads to a whole new paradigm. It leads to a whole new can of worms that needs to be explored. So A and B go together, C and D go together. As in, you might also be, accosted by a different kind of temporality that says, well, this is the end of time. This is the Ant E Kal. This is the end of everything. Or you also might be accosted by the same, a different temporality that says, well, this is of all time. It's the Anant Kal, right? So if you were to look at video game narratives from this perspective, the question would emerge is, how do video game narratives engage with time and temporalities, both in terms of their narrative and gameplay? So it's not just the way the narrative is structured. It's also about how you as an individual playing that game engages with the temporalities evident. The third is the New Monsters thesis. Okay. So the New Monsters thesis maps all the presence and fictional futures in narratives, and it hunts for new monsters. Now I see new monsters as an acronym of mutating and mutagenic ontological narratives in space-time, echoing realistic situations, right? So a very rough question would be, how do video game narratives project and negotiate monsters, bosses, final stages? Like how do they appear? Why do they appear? What is their purpose within the game? What is their linkages with the material realities of production and consumption? So you might say something like, how do current material realities and specific vantage points, find themselves imbricated or encoded in video game narratives? We have examples from Fauji or Delta Force, for example, which specifically talk about clashes in localized clashes. Second, that monsters also keep on changing, right? Monsters are never fixed. So what are the mechanics through which these monsters keep on mutating? The classic example is the Sangheli elites in Halo, because, well, initially the primary antagonists, but later, human beings, the UNSC has kind of a truce with them, and then they fight the brutes, which is like another section of the Covenant. So even the monsters keep on changing. And third, how do these monsters fuse genre conventions, historical precepts, market forces? For example, the final boss of Return to Castle Wolfenstein is Heinrich I. and he has been resurrected. So Heinrich I was this, Anglo-Saxon, Saxon warlord from, I think, the 10th century, if I'm not mistaken, 960 something, and he has been resurrected on the orders of, Reichsführer, Heinrich Himmler himself. So two evil figures coming together. So how does this respond to genre conventions, to history, to market forces? Because, well, Nazi bashing is, in video games is sort of one way to get back at the horrible injustices which were perpetrated by the Nazis in the 1940s. So we reach at a stage where we have a bunch of questions, very rough questions that we can direct at video game narratives. But then, rather than talking about just ways to explore video game narratives, I would rather if we can do something even more. And that is something even more that we hope to do through this section. Again, this is a very participatory endeavor. So when this talk ends, when this session ends, when you have time, I would request you to go sit with a cup of coffee or chai and just think about the questions if you think you want to. If you don't want to, it's perfectly fine. But if you do think about them, maybe something good might come out of it, if you feel like, right? So, okay, got it. There are video games in India. We didn't really have that many video games when compared to, say, an Anglo-American market, but now things are changing. More and more games are now being produced. 4G is an example, Raji, is an example, Ashanti is an example. So these are just some of the examples. But then again, this is also required because now I can go back to my topic, that was yoga firing new Gandhis, because when we see in there, in the 1990s, in video games, in say Street Fighter, India is Dhalsim. India is yoga. India is yoga fire. India is yoga flame. India is, being able to extend your limbs to hit the other person, using yogic techniques. India is this elephant, two elephants standing behind a screen, with their trunks raised while two fighters, fight it out. But then things change, right? However, then we come to the nuclear Gandhi, which has been written about a lot, and Shavita has also written about it. And so why is it that Gandhi? I mean, it may be a false memory. I mean, the entire idea may be a false memory, but then the fact remains that people do pay homage to this false memory now. It may have been it has been incorporated in future versions of Civ, about how the kind of India that we see, how the kind of India that we know of is very different sometimes from the, orientalized India that we see in video games narratives, and there are two ways to proceed now. One, we can, of course, using theory and paradigms and academic narratives, we can, critique this kind of misrepresentation or whatever you would like to call it. That is the first way. The second way is have games of our own. And this is what I think is the need of the hour. Having games of our own, having narratives of our own, having perspectives of our own that are then deployed in the market. That might be an equally valid way of proceeding, of talking about different things. And that is what this particular section intends to talk about how we can synthesize new video game narratives. And at the same time, again, I would like to say that, my perspective till now has been severely limited by language, as in, I come from literature. So when I see a video game, when I play a video game, I access it through language. I access it through the plot, the storyline, the narrative, somehow. But that is not the Gestalten whole that a video game really is, because a video game is also visuals, it's interaction, it's gameplay, right? So just ideas from literary studies or film studies, they are utterly, they can't really explicate the holistic Gestalten experience. And for that, we need to find new theories which are being worked on and which have been worked on. But I would focus more on the creative aspect about how video game narratives or video games can be constructed, if not at the technical level, then maybe at the mental level inside our heads, right? So, and this is something which I'm really interested in. I mean, for this particular session, I mean, theory aside, we're all here because we love video games. I mean, and if you love something, then why not world build inside your head about having your own little video game? It may not be, you know, like produced immediately, but at least it would be there inside your head, and that's a great starting point, right? So we know that video games play with local folklore, national myths, universal science. They adhere to genre conventions. They expand the boundaries. But can we come up with our own game plot lines, narrative structures? And that is something which I'm really interested in. And this is again a request to all of you who are here, who have taken time out to come and listen to this. You know, so just ask yourself about what kind of a game would you like to develop? That's like, you know, a very rough starting point. But what kind of a video game would you like to develop, since we're talking about video games? Would you like it to be an FPS, a TPS, RPG, arcade, strategy? Like, what is that particular style of video game that speaks to you the most? And once you have that, then ask yourself, what is the spatial and temporal location that you would like to create your world? And then start the process of world building, you know. So if you want to do this after this, you know, the session is done, after this day is done, just go and write one single paragraph about the world, about its spatial location, its temporal location, write about your characters, write about your protagonists, write about your antagonist, think about the weapons they're going to have, the powers they are to have, think about the game objectives, the tasks, the maps, the stages. How do you advance from point A to point B? Think if you want it to be a single play campaign, think if you want it to be an MMO, right? And try to create this world that somehow represents you and also responds to the world around you. Because theory is important, theory is extremely important, right? But I think, and I may be very wrong, so please, you know, correct me, you know, if I'm wrong, that creating something is, you know, an even cooler intervention, because then you're saying that, okay, this is the way it can be, this is the way it could be, and you come up with your own idea of a world, right? So something as simple as, I would like to have an FPS which is set in, say, Delhi, say, you know, 1857, say, you know, the War of Independence, the first War of Independence, right? And you can play either as a sepoy of, a sepoy from India. You can play as a British officer. You can play as a mercenary. You can play as somebody who's just trying to escape the mayhem that 1857 has unleashed, right? And then you think about your protagonist. Then you think about your character. And then you have the backstories. Now, the backstories needn't always come in the narrative, but when they appear, they come through backstories, if you know what I mean, right? So people have to act, behave, talk in a way that is sort of driven by their socio-political context, that is driven by their realities. I mean, you cannot have, say, a vendor selling bananas in the streets of Delhi, there, and when you to him, he talks to you in flawless American English. So that is something which kind of, but if that person has if, for example, I remember, was it, I think in Assassin's Creed India, the accent, for example, used is pretty Indian from what I remember. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is what I remember, that the accent of characters is Indian. It's not very British or American, right? So point being, you can, of course, keep American or British accents. You can do whatever you want. It's your world. But at the same time, my only request would be to create characters that somehow come out of their world, right? Who respond to their world, who are imbricated in a particular setup. Unless you are doing magical realism and say, well, I'll do whatever the hell I want to. In that case, also, it's perfectly fine, right? So Yes. So this is something I really wanted to talk about. But now, as I said, since this is more of a conversation, I would love to hear from you, and maybe we can discuss things more. Yeah. So thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you so much, Sami. This was wonderful, and I'm sure everybody has begun thinking about it in depth already. I know that I have. And just a reminder to everyone that we are open for questions now. So you can either use the raise hand feature and unmute yourself to talk, or you can just type in the questions in the chat box. While we wait for questions, is it okay if I pose one? Sami? Yeah. So Poonam and I are both diversity officers at DiGRA India. And a lot of the times we end up talking about diversity and representation in video games. I feel like science fiction already has its own trysts with diversity and representation. And I was wondering if you could think about Indian bodies, or even Muslim bodies for that matter, South Asian bodies, and their connection to neo monsters. How would you conceptualize South Asian bodies, or bodies that are usually othered, especially when we look at games set in India in contemporary times? Something
Yes.
like Uncharted, The Lost Legacy, and you have both a collapsing of the past and present. And once again, it's a wonderful game. It gets a lot of things right, but I also think it does fall back on some of the orientalizing stereotypes. So how would you position us as then gamers entering on our own worlds, but mediatized game worlds?
See, as I said, the best way ahead is not to critique, but to create.
Mm-hmm.
We can, of course, write as many essays and articles and monographs and chapters on these representations, invoking everybody from Said to Foucault to God knows who else. We may do whatever we want, but ultimately the point remains that we need more texts that somehow are able to portray reality which is different from the one that is being portrayed. And that is, my only sort of advice here, if I may use this word, that, critiquing is fine. I mean, we all do it, as, academicians, as researchers, as scholars, critique as much as you want. It's wonderful. It's fun. I also do it sometimes. But for me, at least, as I said, I'm talking from my perspective. From me, at least, it's cooler to create rather than critique. So you very rightly, I mean, there are issues, because if you actually look at the geopolitical scenario today, or if you look at what is actually happening, it is something of a dystopian video game. I mean, the COVID pandemic, for example, right? We did have a game called Zombie Blocks, which was produced by an Indian company. It won FICCI best game in 2016, or I'm not sure. Just Google Zombie Blocks. You'll find out what I'm talking about. But as I said, that I would highly request and encourage all the bright young minds and scholars and gamers here, that it's up to you guys to create and bring newer ways of approaching our reality. And if you have an idea, there would be someone with a financial backing out there. So don't think that, well, I can write a short story, I can write a book, but if I write a sort of a video game narrative, what do I do? Because I'm not a coder, I'm not a VFX artist. There is no way in hell that is going to happen. I mean, things are changing, because India as a market is slowly expanding, in terms of video games. So there is always scope for more ideas and more narratives. So we move from Dhalsim, for example, so to the COVID pandemic, where certain bodies were associated with carrying the virus itself. I mean, little zombies, and the Indian, extremely noble and rigorous Indian media was, they sort of, fed this narrative to the entire nation, well, some bodies or some people, who are actually, bearers of corona, right? So this is the kind of a dystopian Resident Evil setting. So question would be, if Resident Evil is set in India, or if the Resident Evil game series is set in India, what would happen? That is the question, because you do not really need an umbrella corporation. You can just say, well, the T virus is not coming from from the umbrella corporation. It's coming from these people, and in these people, you can fit anything you want that suits a particular narrative, and that's the scary part. But at the same time, it's also an emancipatory space, because if you come and critique, if you come and create perspectives from different vantage points, then you just add on and you actually start talking, right? So as I said, don't just critique, also create.
Yes, definitely. As somebody who works in dystopian worlds, I totally get it. And I know part of reading dystopia is to imagine better futures. I would like to talk more about this, but it looks like we have a couple of questions. So I'll go in the order that the questions were raised in. So Shavik, you can go first.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. So my question is kind of related to what Sami and you have already just mentioned, but I'm just going to take us a step back. I'm curious, and being a little provocative here perhaps, but why is it that SF and video games are, especially when related to India, SF in India, video games, not SF in India, but SF in general, but video games and the treatment of India and the global South, why are they generally kind of so colonially minded, do you think? I mean, it seems to be like, why not the other genres? And it's probably a naive question, but why these two kind of, is it because I was told at a recent conference that that's probably their basic procedural rhetoric, that's they move towards that. Is that what do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, so for example, when Shakespeare was writing, he set his plays or settings in this exotic locations from that look, from his vantage point. And as of now, it's just that traditionally India, East Asia, Far East Asia, Middle East Asia, they have been very exotic locations. So setting games there is kind of, so it taps into what already exists in the minds of people in that particular market, while at the same time giving them the exotic value. The classic example is chilled monkey brains from Indiana Jones. I mean, it's not something that exists, but well, it suits the narrative, because well, you have chilled monkey brains, and I sincerely hope that the next Indiana Jones corrects this. But then again, there would be chilled monkey brains being served in India as long as Indians don't start writing about chilled monkey brains in other places. So we need to somehow displace and talk about chilled monkey brains elsewhere, or at least come up with our own rhetoric that says, okay, this is not how it works. So I mean, yes, again, these are questions which are extremely important questions, and I would still say that the best way to answer a question is by posing another narrative rather than posing another interpretation. I mean, for me at least. I mean, as I said, so yeah.
Thank you so much, Sami.
Thanks.
Orithra, you're next.
First of all, I love the talk very much, and I am an avid reader of Ye. I have recently become an avid reader of your books, and literally have your book beside me. So one thing that I was thinking while listening to your talk is about, I love the whole point that you made, that, enough critique, let's just start creating. So in this regards, I was thinking one aspect is, and this was related with Emil Hamar's talk recently in DiGRA India itself, where he was talking about different modes of play and how we can recontextualize existing gameplay methods to, kind of combat the whole imperialist ideals embedded within these gameplay systems. So within that, I was thinking that I also posed the question back then that how much of it is just reskins and how much we should really think about coming up with newer modes of play, which are kind of, I mean, obviously it is impossible to create anything from the scratch. So obviously it has to come from existing methods of play, and especially with regards to Indian SF, I was also thinking that how it has happened within the literary genre itself. For example, if we go back to Begum Ruqaya's Sultana's Dream, it being one of the major and very landmark pieces of literature in India's science fiction era. So there, for example, it also can be said that it also has this kind of theme of trying to fight back the quote unquote oppressive structures by the way of creation. So, and I was thinking that how much of that way of creation needs to be rethinking of completely current new mechanics and systems, and not just as reskin recontextualization of the narratives.
Absolutely, absolutely. I get that question. Thank you, Ritru. See, so things are broken. Let's first, assume that things are broken. We all accept that things are broken. This world is broken. It is full of hatred. It is full of violence. It is full of fanaticism, and things have to be changed for the better, right? So this is something which we all agree, most of us. So now you have two ways to proceed. One, you can write back to the empire. That is being done for the past 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, that you're writing back to the empire and saying that, no, this is not the case. This is not how it works. The idea you want us to portray doesn't really, work. And then you systematically dismantle the argument that is made by the empire and say that, no, this is not how it's supposed to work, right? The other way to respond is you just say that, well, I'm not just going to give any damn about any empire. I'm just going to escape the entire structurality of this, empire center periphery logic and say, I'm just going to create in a world, for a world, and by a world where the empire is no longer even a thing. It's gone. I'm creating my own narratives in a way that don't really accept this, the presence of an empire. And that is something which you were kind of hinting at, that you can of course write back. And when I say write back, I say write back as a metaphor. You can write about games, you can create games, you can do anything. So it's not just limited to language. It's not just so it's not just a text. You can do whatever you want, right? So rather than saying that, okay, I'm going to acknowledge the presence of the empire and I'm going to dismantle the argument of the empire, say the empire no longer exists for me and I'm going to do something radically or drastically new. And that is a choice which all of us have, right? So you can opt for the latter, you can opt for the former, you can do something else. The kind of ludic spaces that, we inhibit, and especially in terms of video games, especially in terms of science fiction, the possibilities are so infinite, like they're endless possibilities that I think that whatever you want to do, just go ahead and do it, and trust me, there would be a theory somewhere to back your claims. So don't worry about that. What you have to worry about is that what you're doing, what you're saying, what you're executing, what you're creating, does that manifest your vision of what you want today and tomorrow to be? If that is the case, then go ahead and do it. Again, this is I'm coming back to this point again. I like theory. I don't love it. I don't understand it. I don't read much of it, right? But what I do like is that you can jump from point A to point B, and you can create your own stuff. And trust me, whatever you choose, whatever you say, you can go to the library, go to JSTOR, and find a theory that backs up exactly what you're going to say. Right? So, I mean, you can, of course, create new theories, but at the same time, we somehow get so enamored by the idea of theory that we forget what we're trying to say. I mean, it happens with me at least. So that's something I would say that choose your poison, as they say, and if that is something that works for you, it works for you. I mean, it does. That very indirectly answers your question, Aritra. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you so much. Ruth, I see that you've posted a question. Would you like to raise it yourself, or may I read it? Right. Let me read it then. Ruth says she's interested in your thoughts on the in situ model and the SF games with slightly different playlists to the norm. What are your thoughts on this model and Death Stranding?
Okay, well, that's a great question. And I refuse to answer the question on the grounds that I don't know the answer, because I haven't played the game, right? So I haven't really played this game, so I can't really comment on this, because as I said, my machine stopped some time ago for certain reasons, which Oigda knows. I am sorry, I can't really comment on the particulars of this game. I mean, how can I comment on something I haven't played, right? So I mean, if you can tell me a little about what the game is, maybe I can shed some light. I don't know. I mean, has anybody here played this game, Death Stranding?
Yeah, I have, but it's kind of difficult to explain. Like in, I think Oritro has played for longer than I should like to hear. But yeah, but it's kind of difficult to explain it in like 5 minutes. Isn't it, Oritro, or do you want to try?
I mean, it is trying. It can be said that it is trying to create a much more non-violent mode of gameplay.
But it's about, can you tell Sami what it is about? Really, the protagonist, what he does, he's kind of like carrying stuff from
yeah. So the world is basically, it's kind of very prescient from when it came. It came in 2019, and it was about a world who has gone into isolation due to kind of a pandemic situation, and only the people who are staying outside the bunkers are these delivery people who are delivering important mails and packages to everyone's home. And so essentially it kind of prophesied what 2020 onwards world would be like, and hence, as I said, the game was basically about, if you are trying to crumble it into 2 words, it would be more hiking simulator mixed with package delivery mechanics into it. So that's
got it.
That's very quickly, yeah.
Got it. Thanks. Okay, so it's a lot like, and is this like an FPS thing? Is it an FPS thing, TPS thing?
Third person. It's a third person open world format.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So if you play as this individual who's engaged in making deliveries and sort of, they have to climb and hike and go to these places and not kill. Again, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of again, this is not theory at all, but the carrier bag theory of fiction, as in the protagonist is not the spear, the protagonist is the carry bag, because it has more possibilities of understanding our world. And as for so now I do know the premise of the game. Let me please read the question, which was about different play styles. Yes. So I think in terms of different play styles, the question that we may ask is that why is this shift from a character who has to go on rampage, or a character who has to engage with weapons, or kill aliens, or somehow survive in a world ravaged by zombies, or survive on an alien planet. In this case, if it is set on Earth, maybe our planet itself has become an alien landscape because of the pandemic, or whatever is the apocalypse that has happened. And in this sort of quasi post-apocalyptic world, you have these individuals who act as delivery conduits of various essential commodities. So yes, I mean, again, prima facie, I can say this. I haven't really played, as I said, so I don't know what the game style is, what the gameplay is. But prima facie, the question would be about how such a kind of game and the network of similar games in which you don't have a protagonist with a gun, you have a protagonist with a life-saving drug that somehow goes, and a life-saving drug or food or whatever that somehow goes and saves lives and helps people. How these kind of games exist in a spectrum, and what is their market share when compared to games in which you have explicit violence, and is this an example of humanity's attempt to reboot itself, to provide alternate narratives, to provide alternate ways of surviving, to provide different ways, different vantage points of approaching the horror that has become our world? And yes, you can absolutely engage with these questions, but to go into the specifics, I'll have to engage more. But thank you for this question. I'll definitely check this game out.
Thank you so much for your wonderful questions and answers both. I see that Diwali had a question. I think it's probably related to more specific texts. And maybe she can tell us a bit more about what exactly she's working on. She's asking a technical question, I believe, that her proposal is on select Indian science fiction and whether she needs to stick to a particular genre of fiction for this, or can she work across genres?
Absolutely, you can do whatever you want. You're doing this for your MPhil or your PhD, or like, what are you doing this for? Is Dipali here?
Yes, I think so. Dipali, can you maybe speak up if you'd like?
Otherwise, no problem. I can just, I mean, you can do absolutely whatever you want. Please talk to your supervisor. And you can work on any format you want. You can work on novels, you can work on short stories, you can work on films, you can work on all of them. You can work on video games, you can work on anything you want because it is your proposal. So it depends on what are the kind of text you're working on, what are the kind of filters you have deployed, and what is the rationale for those filters. So you might say that I'm going to work on short stories and novels, fiction. I'm going to work on Indian science fiction from, say, 2000s to 2010s in this particular language, right? So get your filters in place, and once you can rationalize your filters, you can work on whatever you want. I mean, it's entirely up to you. So talk more to your, yeah. Okay.
They told me that you can choose only a novels because your title is fiction. So I ask you.
Well, I worked on short stories and novels for my PhD, and my title also I had fiction. But again, that's the thing. What you can do is, if you want, you can say that you see fiction itself as a metaphor, and you think that both short stories or anything written is a part of that. So you can sort of come up with a theoretical argument. But I mean, usually, if you're working on a particular genre, you can work on whatever you want. If you were working on, say, the novel form, and then that would have been different. But if you're working on a particular mode or genre, in this case, science fiction or fantasy or mythology, you can say, I'm just going to study, I'm just going to read, view different manifestations of this genre across forms. And that can sort of justify your proposal. I'm surprised, but hoping to hear that it works out.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Good luck, Dipali. I hope things figure out on your end soon. We're already out of time. In fact, we have ended up taking more of Sami's time than we promised to. So thank you for being so generous with us. And since we are on a really tight schedule, I'll end with a very short thanks. On behalf of DiGRA India, thank you so much, Sami, and everybody here who gathered to hear Sami speak. I believe this has been a wonderful inaugural keynote, and it just speaks that the rest of the conference is going to be just as great. Our next section begins in a minute, actually, but I think we can wait for like 5 minutes, and if anybody needs to grab tea or coffee or something, and we'll see you all very soon, in like a minute, as I said. Thank you so much, and have a great conference ahead.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. A pleasure talking to all of you. Have fun. Bye.
Thanks so much, Sami. I'm going to turn off the recording, Sarah. Is that okay?
Yes.